There is a bluff in southern Minnesota where the land simply stops. One moment you are walking through farm country, corn to the horizon, and the next the ground falls away into a valley so wide it looks like a mistake. It is not a mistake. It is a scar, cut by one of the largest rivers this continent has ever carried. And on the rim of that scar, 446 acres of oak and prairie hold a story that Minnesota is still learning how to tell honestly. This is the Ney Nature Center, on the bluffs above the Minnesota River near the small town of Henderson. The town of Henderson sits in Sibley County on the west bank. The preserve itself lies across the water in Des Sioux County on the high ground. 446 acres of forest, ravine, wetland, and restored prairie, held by Des Sioux County and cared for by a small nonprofit. It is quiet, it is local, and it is layered deeper than almost anywhere in the state. The trails here are unhurried. They loop through burr oak and maple, past old field roads and stone piles left by farmers a century gone, and every so often the canopy opens and the whole valley appears at once. Look at the scale of it. The river down there is modest, brown and slow, the kind of river you could cross in a canoe on a lazy afternoon. It is far too small for the valley it sits in. That mismatch is the first clue. To explain the valley, you have to go back to the ice. During the last glaciation, the Laurentide ice sheet lay across most of what is now Minnesota, a slab of ice thick enough to press the crust of the earth downward. As it withdrew north, its meltwater had nowhere to go. It ponded against the retreating ice front and against ridges of dumped rock and gravel, and it grew into something enormous. Geologists call it Lake Agassiz, and it was larger than all the Great Lakes combined. Picture a freshwater sea sprawling across what is now northwestern Minnesota, North Dakota, and a great deal of Manitoba and Ontario. Cold, silty, fed constantly by a melting ice sheet, and dammed. Water that cannot leave will rise until it finds a way out. Somewhere near what is now Browns Valley, on the modern border of Minnesota and South Dakota, the lake found the low point in the rim of its basin, and the rim gave way. What came through that gap is known as Glacial River Warren. It drained Lake Agassiz on and off between roughly 13,500 and 10,600 years ago, and while it ran, it was one of the great rivers of the world. It tore a trench southeast toward Mankato, then swung northeast toward what is now the Twin Cities. That trench, in places up to 5 miles wide and 250 feet deep, is the valley below us. Geologists have a wonderfully plain phrase for what happened next. They call the Minnesota an underfit river. The flood ended, the ice was gone, the lake was gone, and what remained was a small prairie river inheriting a canyon built for a monster. Everything at Ney sits on the shoulder of that inheritance. The bluff we are standing on is not a hill that grew upward. It is the edge of what the flood left behind when it took everything else away. Steep ground writes its own rules. On the south and west-facing slopes of a valley like this, the sun hits hard, the thin soil dries fast and trees struggle. What thrives instead is dry Bluff Prairie, a tough, sun-loving community of grasses and deep-rooted flowers clinging to a slope too steep to plow. These slopes survived because nobody could farm them. Some of the oldest continuous plant communities in this part of the state are the ones that were simply too inconvenient to destroy. Up on the flat ground, the story is different. Here the trees won, or rather, here the trees were allowed to win. Walk this trail and you pass under oaks with heavy, low, spreading limbs, branches that reach sideways instead of straight up. A tree only grows like that in the open, with no neighbors crowding it for light. Those wide arms are a memory. They tell you this closed forest was once something else entirely. Before European settlement, oak savanna covered roughly 10% of Minnesota. It is a landscape with no modern equivalent, neither prairie nor forest, but scattered big-limbed oaks standing above a sea of grass. It was made and maintained by fire, much of it set deliberately by the people who lived here, to keep the grass open and the game coming. Bur oak, with its thick corky bark, could survive those fires. Almost nothing else could. Stop the fire and the savanna closes. Brush comes in, then shade-tolerant trees, then a canopy, and the grass and the wildflowers underneath simply vanish. That is exactly what happened across Minnesota. Estimates vary and the accounting is difficult, but almost every source agrees the loss was catastrophic, and that what survives today is a tiny fraction of 1% of what once stood. Oak savanna is now among the rarest plant communities on the continent. Ney has been slowly, patiently trying to bring some of it back. This valley is Dakota homeland. Not was, is. The river itself carries a Dakota name, Minnesota Wakpa, and the meaning is debated even among fluent speakers. Some render it as cloudy water, some as sky-tinted water, water so clear it takes the color of the clouds above it. The state took its name from the river. Every road sign in Minnesota is a Dakota word, worn smooth by a century and a half of people saying it without knowing what they are saying. Cutting across this property is an old roadbed. The Nature Center believes it was part of the Red River Oxcart Trail system, the network of routes that carried furs and goods between the Red River settlements in the north and the Mississippi. Before it was an Oxcart Trail, it was almost certainly a footpath, because the Oxcart drivers did not invent these lines across the country. They followed routes that indigenous people had walked for generations, along the easy grades and the reliable crossings. The Red River carts were wooden, built without a scrap of iron, and their ungreased wooden axles are said to have shrieked so loudly they could be heard for miles before the caravan appeared. Whether this exact track carried them, we cannot prove standing here. What is certain is that this ground was a corridor long before it was a farm. The land under this trail has been a way through for a very long time. For most of 2 centuries, the relationship between Europeans and the Dakota in this valley was not settlement but trade. Furs moved out, cloth and metal and guns and credit moved in. Traders married into Dakota families and built lives inside them. The men who would later shape this county were fur men first, and the ledgers they kept, the debts they recorded against Dakota hunters, would turn out to matter far more than anyone in a trading post could have guessed. That is the part of the story that gets skipped. When the treaties finally came, the traders were not bystanders. They were at the table with their account books, and they were paid first. Hold that thought as we walk, because it explains why so much of what happened in this valley was not a sudden catastrophe. It was a slow, documented, entirely foreseeable one. On the 23rd of July, 1851, upriver from here at Traverse Des Sioux, the Sisseton and Wahpeton bands signed away roughly 21 million acres for about $1,665,000. That is somewhere near 7.5 cents an acre. $275,000 of it was set aside immediately to satisfy debts claimed by traders. With the companion treaty at Mendota, the Dakota gave up something close to 24 million acres. The Dakota were to keep a strip of land 20 miles wide along the Minnesota River, a reservation that would have run right through this valley. The Senate struck that article out. It was later restored by legislation, but the message had been delivered clearly enough. And there was a second document at the signing, presented as part of the ceremony, which committed much of the payment straight to the traders. Many who signed did not understand what they were signing. The land was open now, at least in the eyes of the United States, and the men who had helped open it moved fast. In August of 1852, barely a year after the treaty, a man named Joseph Renshaw Brown founded a town on the west bank below us and named it Henderson, after his mother's maiden name. Brown had arrived at Fort Snelling in 1820 as a boy of 15, a musician with the Army. He knew this country better than almost anyone. Joseph R. Brown was a soldier, a fur trader, a lumberman, a printer, a speculator, a justice of the peace, an inventor, a newspaperman, and a politician, sometimes several at once. He married Susan Frenier, a Sisseton Dakota woman, and their children were Dakota. He would go on to serve as an agent to the Dakota. His town and his family sit at the exact seam where 2 worlds were being pressed together, and where that seam would eventually tear. Henderson grew ferociously. By 1855, only 3 years old, it had more than 60 buildings, a hotel, a warehouse, a steam sawmill, and Brown's own house doing duty as store, boarding house, and family home. Steamboats came up the Minnesota when the water allowed. Freight went out to the inland settlements. By the mid-1860s, 2 brickyards were firing, and Henderson was the county seat of Sibley County, with a courthouse raised in 1879. Around the new town, the bluffs filled with farms. The oaks were cut or grazed, the grass was broken by the plow, the fire stopped, and the savanna began to close behind them. It happened quickly. Within a generation, the shape of this land was rewritten. And on this particular hilltop, a German family arrived and began the long, ordinary work that would, in the end, be the reason we can walk here at all. Wilhelm and Sophia Ney built their cabin on this ground in roughly 1854 to 1856. It measured 24 feet by 32, and it was raised from hewn maple and basswood logs, cut from the woods around it. It was not a grand house. It was a house made of the hill it stood on. The Ney family would live and farm on this land in an unbroken line until 2002. The homestead site is still here, quiet on the way to the ravine. A second farm on the property, the Kahlo Place, was occupied from 1900 until 1967. Two families, a century and a half on one hill. It would be easy to tell that as a warm story about pioneers and perseverance and leave it there. But we are standing in the wrong valley for a story that's simple. Because 6 years after Wilhelm Ney built this cabin, everything came apart. The treaty payments were late. The traders had taken their cut. The game was gone, the hunting had failed, and Dakota families penned onto that narrow strip of reservation land were starving while food sat in the agency warehouses. In August of 1862, the pressure broke, and war came to the Minnesota River Valley. Over roughly 6 weeks, hundreds of settlers were killed, hundreds of Dakota were killed, and the valley emptied in terror in both directions. The war ended in September at a place the Army named Camp Release. What followed is the part that Minnesota spent 100 years not saying out loud, and it is the reason we are telling this at all. Because the road through Henderson, the town Joseph Brown built at the foot of this bluff, was on the route. What happened in that street in November of 1862 is one of the ugliest hours in the history of this state. On the 7th of November, 1862, a column of roughly 1,658 Dakota people, overwhelmingly women, children, and elders, most of whom had fought nobody, was marched about 150 miles from the lower Sioux agency down this valley to Fort Snelling. They walked and rode in wagons under military escort through the towns in the cold. At Henderson, a mob of white townspeople came at the column with guns, knives, clubs, and stones. Samuel J. Brown, son of Joseph Brown and his Dakota wife Susan, was traveling with that column, and he wrote down what he saw. An enraged white woman rushed up to one of the wagons, tore a nursing baby from its mother, and dashed it violently on the ground. The child died within hours. Brown watched the burial. The body was laid to rest in the crotch of a tree. That happened in the street of the town below this bluff. Meanwhile, the military commission convened by Colonel Henry Hastings Sibley had been trying Dakota men at a pace no honest court could defend. Hundreds of cases were run between late September and the 3rd of November. Some trials lasted less than 5 minutes. 303 men were condemned to death. Abraham Lincoln reviewed the records and commuted most of the sentences over Sibley's objection. On the 26th of December, 1862, 38 Dakota men were hanged together at Mankato. It remains the largest mass execution in the history of the United States, and a year afterward, the Judge Advocate General of the Army concluded that Sibley had not even possessed the authority to convene those trials, and that his conduct had violated the Articles of War. The finding changed nothing. The men were already dead. The bodies were already buried and then dug up. History wrote the verdict long after it could do any good. The column that survived Henderson reached Fort Snelling in mid-November and was penned in an internment camp below the walls through the winter. Around 1,600 people, in tents, in a Minnesota winter. Measles and disease moved through them. Estimates of the dead in that camp range from about 100 to 300, and the true number is not known. In the spring of 1863, the survivors were loaded onto steamboats and exiled from Minnesota. They were shipped to Crow Creek in Dakota Territory, where more died, and later to Santee in Nebraska. Others fled to Canada. Bounties were placed on Dakota scalps in Minnesota. And yet the Dakota are here. Communities on this very river at Lower Sioux and Upper Sioux, at Prairie Island, at Shakopee, and many more across the Dakotas, Nebraska, and Canada. A living people in the present tense on the land the river is named for. The town below us is the seat of a county named Sibley, after Henry Hastings Sibley, Minnesota's first governor and the colonel who ran those trials. His name is on a county, a state park, a highway, a great deal of Minnesota. In recent years, a Twin Cities high school voted to take it off their building. There is a real argument here, and it is worth being honest about. Sibley was a builder of this state. He was also this. A place can be beautiful and be the scene of something terrible. Both things are simply true, and the beauty does not launder the rest of it. That is a hard thing to carry on a September afternoon with the light coming through the oaks. But it is the honest weight of walking here, and this ground has been asked to hold heavier things than a walker in good shoes. The Ney family kept farming. The land passed from Wilhelm to his son Henry in 1884, and in 1945 it came to 3 grandchildren, Gilbert, Ruby, and Flossie Ney. Ruby was the one who made the decision. In 1990, on her death, the original 160-acre homestead and more than 200 additional acres were bequeathed to Le Sueur County with a clear instruction. It was to be a wildlife preserve. That is an extraordinary thing for a farm family to do with a farm. Ruby's nephew Donald, the last of the Neys to work this ground, added 80 more acres in 1997, bringing the preserve to 446. A board formed in 1995 to do the actual work, and the work was strange and slow. Not to build anything, to take a farm and acre by acre, hand it back to what it had been. Down in a low corner there is a wetland the family called the Frog Pond. It was a slough when the settlers came, drained for cropland in the early 1900s like tens of thousands of Minnesota wetlands, and it stayed cropland for most of a century. In 1989, Ruby Ney put the water back. One woman, one wetland, 1 year before she died. The frogs are the loudest argument in this preserve that restoration actually works. On the old crop acres, they have planted native hardwoods and prairie. There is a 10-acre restored prairie here now. Big bluestem and little bluestem and prairie blazing star, roots reaching down through soil that spent 100 years growing corn. Near the far end of the oak loop, stand old oaks the staff call the Seven Sisters, wide-limbed veterans of the Savanna, with the brush cleared from around them so they can be what they were. It is worth sitting with the timescale of this place. A flood that lasted 3,000 years and cut a canyon. Fires that kept the oaks open for millennia. A treaty that took 24 million acres in a single summer afternoon. A hanging, 100 years of plowing. And then one woman at the end of an ordinary life on an ordinary farm, quietly deciding to give it back. All of it is this hill. All of it is under our feet. The grass will be here after us. The oaks will keep reaching sideways into an opening that is slowly being returned to them, and the river below will keep flowing, far too small for its valley, carrying its Dakota name out to the Mississippi. If you ever find yourself on this road in southern Minnesota, take the turn, walk the bluff, and be honest about what you are standing on. Thank you for watching. Follow for more trails of the world.